Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead?
The Hollow Man by Thomas Burke. He came up one of the narrow streets which lead from the docks and turned into a road whose farther end was gay with the lights of London. At the end of this road he went deep into the lights of London and sometimes into its shadows. Farther and farther he went from the river and did not pause until he had reached a poor quarter near the centre. He made a tall, spare figure, clothed in a black mackintosh. Below this could be seen brown dungaree trousers. A peaked cap hid most of his face. The little it was exposed was white and sharp. In the autumn mist that filled the lighted streets as well as the dark, he seemed a wraith, and some of those who passed him looked again, not sure whether they had indeed seen a living man. One or two of them moved their shoulders, as though shrinking from something. His legs were long, but he walked with the short, deliberate steps of a blind man, though he was not blind. His eyes were open, and he stared straight ahead, but he seemed to see nothing and hear nothing. Neither the mournful hooting of sirens across the black water of the river, nor the genial windows of the shops in the big streets near the centre drew his head to right or left. He walked as though he had no destination in mind, yet constantly, at this corner or that, he turned. It seemed that an unseen hand was guiding him to a given point of whose location he was himself ignorant. He was searching for a friend of 15 years ago, and the unseen hand or some dog instinct had led him from Africa to London, and was now leading him, along the last mile of his search, to a certain little eating-house. He did not know that he was going to the eating-house of his friend Nameless, but he did know, from the time he left Africa, that he was journeying towards Nameless, and he now knew that he was very near to Nameless. Nameless didn't know that his old friend was anywhere near him, though he had observed conditions that evening. He might have wondered why he was sitting up an hour later than usual. He was seated in one of the pews of his prosperous working men's dining rooms, a little gold mine, his wife's relations called it, and he was smoking and looking at nothing. He had added up the till and written the copies of the bill of fare for next day, and there was nothing to keep him out of bed after his 15 hours' attention to business. Had he been asked why he was sitting up later than usual, he would first have answered that he didn't know that he was, and would then have explained, in default of any other explanation, that it was for the purpose of having a last pipe. He was quite unaware that he was sitting up and keeping the door unlatched because a long-parted friend from Africa was seeking him and slowly approaching him and needed his services. He was quite unaware that he had left the door unlatched at that late hour, 11:30, to admit pain and woe. But even as many bells sent dolefully across the night from their steeples their disagreement as to the point of 11:30, pain and woe were but 2 streets away from him. The mackintosh and dungarees and the sharp white face were coming nearer every moment. There was silence in the house and in the streets, a heavy silence, broken or sometimes stressed by the occasional night noises, motor horns, backfiring of lorries, shunting at a distant terminus. That silence seemed to envelop the house, but he did not notice it. He did not notice the bells, and he did not even notice the lagging step that approached his shop and passed and returned and passed again and halted. He was aware of nothing save that he was smoking a last pipe, and he was sitting in somnolence, deaf and blind to anything not in his immediate neighbourhood. But when a hand was laid on the latch, and the latch was lifted, he did hear that, and he looked up, and he saw the door open, and got up and went to it, and there, just within the door, he came face to face with the thin figure of pain and woe. To kill a fellow creature is a frightful thing. At the time the act is committed, the murderer may have sound and convincing reasons to him for his act. But time and reflection may bring regret, even remorse, and this may live with him for many years. Examined in wakeful hours of the night or early morning, the reasons for the act may shed their cold logic and may cease to be reasons and become mere excuses. And these naked excuses may strip the murderer and show him to himself as he is. They may begin to hunt his soul and to run into every little corner of his mind and every little nerve in search of it. And if to kill a fellow creature and to suffer recurrent regret for an act of heated blood is a frightful thing, it is still more frightful to kill a fellow creature and bury his body deep in an African jungle, and then, 15 years later, at about midnight, to see the latch of your door lifted by the hand you had stilled, and to see the man, looking much as he did 15 years ago, walk into your home and claim your hospitality. When the man in the mackintosh and dungarees walked into the dining rooms, Nameless stood still, stared, staggered against the table, supported himself by a hand and said, "Oh." The other man said, "Nameless," and they looked at each other, Nameless with head thrust forward, mouth dropped, eyes wide, the visitor with a dull, glazed expression. If Nameless had not been the man he was, thick, bovine and costive, he would have flung up his arms and screamed. At that moment he felt the need of some such outlet, but did not know how to find it. The only dramatic expressions he gave to the situation was to whisper instead of speak. 20 emotions came to life in his head and spine and wrestled there, but they showed themselves only in his staring eyes and his whisper. His first thought, or rather spasm, was ghosts, indigestion, nervous breakdown. His second, when he saw that the figure was substantial and real, was impersonation. But a slight movement on the part of the visitor dismissed that. It was a little habitual movement which belonged only to that man, an unconscious twitching of the third finger of the left hand. He knew then that it was Gopak, a little changed, but still miraculously 32. Gopak, alive, breathing, and real. No ghost, no phantom of the stomach. He was as certain of that as he was that 15 years ago he had killed Gopak stone dead and buried him. The blackness of the moment was lightened by Gopak. In thin, flat tones he asked, "May I sit down? I'm tired." He sat down and said, "So tired." Nameless still held the table. He whispered, Gopak, but I killed you. I killed you in the jungle. You were dead. I know you were." Gopak passed his hand across his face. He seemed about to cry. "I know you did. I know. That's all I can remember about this earth. You killed me." The voice became thinner and flatter, and then they came and disturbed me. They woke me up and brought me back. He sat with shoulders sagged, arms drooping, hands hanging between knees. After the first recognition, he did not look at Nameless. He looked at the floor. "Came and disturbed you?" Nameless leaned forward and whispered the words, "Woke you up?" "Who?" "The leopard men." "The what?" "The leopard men." The watery voice said it as casually as if it was saying, "The night watchman." The leopard men?" Nameless stared, and his fat face crinkled in an effort to take in the situation of a midnight visitation from a dead man, and the dead man talking nonsense. He felt his blood moving out of its course. He looked at his own hand to see if it was his own hand. He looked at the table to see if it was his table. The hand and the table were facts, and if the dead man was a fact, and he was, his story might be a fact. It seemed, anyway, as sensible as the dead man's presence. He gave a heavy sigh from the stomach. The leopard men. "Yes, I heard about them out there. Tales." Gopak slowly wagged his head. "Not tales. They're real. If they weren't real, I wouldn't be here, would I?" Nameless had to admit this. He had heard many tales out there about the leopard men, and had dismissed them as jungle yarns. But now it seemed jungle yarns had become commonplace fact in a little London shop. The watery voice went on, "They did it. I saw them. I came back in the middle of a circle of them. They killed a Negro to put his life into me. They wanted a white man for their farm. So they brought me back. You may not believe it. You wouldn't want to believe it. You wouldn't want to see or know anything like them. And I wouldn't want any man to. But it's true. That's how I'm here. But I left you absolutely dead. I made every test. It was 3 days before I buried you, and I buried you deep. I know, but that wouldn't make any difference to them. It was a long time after when they came back and brought me back, and I'm still dead, you know. It's only my body they brought back. And the voice trailed into a thread, and I'm so tired. Sitting in his prosperous eating house, Nameless was in the presence of an achieved miracle, but the everyday solid appointments of the eating house wouldn't let him fully comprehend it. Foolishly, as he realized when he had spoken, he asked Gopak to explain what had happened, asked a man who couldn't really be alive to explain how he came to be alive. It was like asking nothing to explain everything. Constantly, as he talked, he felt his grasp on his own mind slipping. The surprise of a sudden visitor at a late hour, the shock of the arrival of a long-dead man, and the realization that this long-dead man was not a wraith, were too much for him. During the next half hour, he found himself talking to Gopak as to the Gopak he had known 17 years ago when they were partners. Then he would be halted by the freezing knowledge that he was talking to a dead man, and that a dead man was faintly answering him. He felt that the thing couldn't really have happened, but in the interchange of talk he kept forgetting the improbable side of it and accepting it. With each recollection of the truth, his mind would clear and settle in one thought. I've got to get rid of him. How am I going to get rid of him? But how did you get here? I escaped. The words came slowly and thinly and out of the body rather than the mouth. How? I don't know. I don't remember anything except our quarrel and being at rest. But why come all the way here? Why didn't you stay on the coast? I don't know. But you're the only man I know, the only man I can remember. But how did you find me? I don't know. But I had to find you. You're the only man who can help me. But how can I help you? The head turned weakly from side to side. I don't know, but nobody else can. Nameless stared through the window, looking onto the lamplit street and seeing nothing of it. The everyday being which had been his half an hour ago had been annihilated, the everyday beliefs and disbeliefs shattered and mixed together. But some shred of his old sense and his old standards remained. He must handle this situation. Well, what do you want to do? What are you going to do? I don't see how I can help you, and you can't stay here, obviously. A demon of perversity sent a facetious notion into his head, introducing Gopak to his wife. This is my dead friend. But on his last spoken remark, Gopak made the effort of raising his head and staring with the glazed eyes at Nameless. But I must stay here. There's nowhere else I can stay. I must stay here. That's why I came. You've got to help me. But you can't stay here. I've got no room, all occupied, nowhere for you to sleep. The one voice said, that doesn't matter. I don't sleep. Hey? I don't sleep. I haven't slept since they brought me back. I can sit here till you can think of some way of helping me. But how can I? He again forgot the background of the situation and began to get angry at the vision of a dead man sitting about the place, waiting for him to think of something. How can I, if you don't tell me how? I don't know, but you've got to. You killed me, and I was dead and comfortable, as it all came from you, killing me. You're responsible for me being like this. So you've got to help me. That's why I came to you. But what do you want me to do? I don't know. I can't think. But nobody but you can help me. I had to come to you. Something brought me straight to you. That means that you're the one that can help me. Now I'm with you. Something will happen to help me. I feel it will. In time, you'll think of something. Nameless found his legs suddenly weak. He sat down and stared with a sick scowl at the hideous and incomprehensible. Here was a dead man in his house, a man he had murdered in a moment of black temper, and he knew in his heart that he couldn't turn the man out. For one thing, he would have been afraid to touch him. He couldn't see himself touching him. For another, faced with the miracle of the presence of a 15 years dead man, he doubted whether physical force or any material agency would be effectual in moving the man. His soul shivered, as all men's souls shiver at the demonstration of forces outside their mental or spiritual horizon. He had murdered this man, and often, in 15 years, he had repented the act. If the man's appalling story were true, then he had some sort of right to turn to Nameless. Nameless recognized that, and knew that whatever happened, he couldn't turn him out. His hot-tempered sin had literally come home to him. The one voice broke into his nightmare. "You go to rest, Nameless. I'll sit here. You go to rest." He put his face down to his hands and uttered a little moan. "Oh, why can't I rest?" Nameless came down early next morning with a half hope that Gopak would not be there, but he was there, seated where Nameless left him last night. Nameless made some tea and showed him where he might wash. He washed listlessly and crawled back to his seat and listlessly drank the tea which Nameless brought to him. To his wife and the kitchen helpers, Nameless mentioned him as an old friend who'd had a bit of a shock. Shipwrecked and knocked on the head, but quite harmless, and he won't be staying long. He's waiting for admission to a home. A good pal to me in the past, and it's the least I can do to let him stay here a few days. Suffers from sleeplessness and prefers to sit up at night. Quite harmless. But Gopak stayed more than a few days. He outstayed everybody. Even when the customers had gone, Gopak was still there. On the first morning of his visit, when the regular customers came in at midday, they looked at the odd white figure sitting vacantly in the first pew, then stared, then moved away. All avoided the pew in which he sat. Nameless explained to him, but his explanation did not seem to relieve the slight tension which settled on the dining room. The atmosphere was not so brisk and chatty as usual. Even those who had their backs to the stranger seemed to be affected by his presence. At the end of the first day, Nameless, noticing this, told him that he had arranged a nice corner of the front room upstairs where he could go and sit by the window, and took his arm to take him upstairs, but Gopak feebly shook the hand away and sat where he was. "No, I don't want to go. I'll stay here. I'll stay here. I don't want to move." And he wouldn't move. After a few more pleadings, Nameless realized with dismay that his refusal was definite, that it would be futile to press him or force him, that he was going to sit in that dining room forever. He was as weak as a child and firm as a rock. He continued to sit in that first pew, and the customers continued to avoid it and to give queer glances at it. It seemed that they half recognized that he was something more than a fellow who'd had a shock. During the second week of his stay, 3 of the regular customers were missing, and more than one of those that remained made acidly facetious suggestions to Nameless that he park his lively friend somewhere else. He made things too exciting for them. All that whoopee took them off their work and interfered with digestion. Nameless told them he would be staying only a day or so longer, but they found that this was untrue, and at the end of the second week, 8 of the regulars had found another place. Each day, when dinner hour came, Nameless tried to get him to take a little walk, but he always refused. He would only go out at night, and then never more than 200 yards from the shop. For the rest, he sat in his pew, sometimes dozing in the afternoon, at other times staring at the floor. He took his food abstractedly, and never knew whether he'd had food or not. He spoke only when questioned, and the burden of his talk was, "I'm so tired." One thing only seemed to arouse any light of interest in him. One thing only drew his eyes from the floor. That was the 17-year-old daughter of his host, who was known as Bubbles, and who helped with the waiting. And Bubbles seemed to be the only member of the shop and its customers who did not shrink from him. She knew nothing of the truth about him, but she seemed to understand him, and the only response he ever gave to anything was to her childish sympathy. She sat and chatted foolish chatter to him. "Bringing him out of himself," she called it. And sometimes he would be brought out to the extent of a watery smile. He came to recognize her step and would look up before she entered the room. Once or twice in the evening, when the shop was empty and Nameless was sitting miserably with him, he would ask, without lifting his eyes, "Where's Bubbles?" and would be told that Bubbles had gone to the pictures or was out at a dance, and would relapse into deeper vacancy. Nameless didn't like this. He was already visited by a curse which in 4 weeks had destroyed most of his business. Regular customers had dropped off 2 by 2, and no new customers came to take their place. Strangers who dropped in once for a meal did not come again. They couldn't keep their eyes or their minds forbidding white-faced figure sitting motionless in the first pew. At midday, when the place had been crowded and latecomers had to wait for a seat, it was now 2/3 empty. Only a few of the most thick-skinned remained faithful. And on top of this there was the interest of the dead man in his daughter, an interest which seemed to be having an unpleasant effect. Nameless hadn't noticed it, but his wife had. "Bubbles don't seem as bright and lively as she was. You noticed it lately? She's getting quiet and a bit slack. Sits about a lot. Paler than she used to be. Her age, perhaps? No, she's not one of those thin, dark sort. No, it's something else. Just the last week or two I've noticed it. Off her food. Sits about doing nothing. No interest. Maybe nothing, just out of sorts, perhaps. How much longer is that horrible friend of yours going to stay?" The horrible friend stayed some weeks longer, 10 weeks in all, while Nameless watched his business drop to nothing and his daughter get pale and peevish. He knew the cause of it. There was no home in all England like his, no home that had a dead man sitting in it for 10 weeks. A dead man brought, after a long time, from the grave to sit and disturb his customers and take the vitality from his daughter. He couldn't tell this to anybody. Nobody would believe such nonsense. But he knew that he was entertaining a dead man, and knowing that a long dead man was walking the earth, he could believe in any result of that fact. He could believe almost anything that he would have derided 10 weeks ago. His customers had abandoned his shop, not because of the presence of a silent white-faced man, but because of the presence of a dead living man. Their minds might not know it, but their blood knew it. And as his business had been destroyed, so he believed would his daughter be destroyed. Her blood was not warning her. Her blood told her only that this was a long-ago friend of her father's, and she was drawn to him. It was at this point that Nameless, having no work to do, began to drink, and it was well that he did so, for out of the drink came an idea, and with that idea he freed himself from the curse upon him and his house. The shop now served scarcely half a dozen customers at midday. It had become ill-kempt and dusty, and the service and the food were bad. Nameless took no trouble to be civil to his few customers. Often, when he was notably under drink, he went to the trouble of being very rude to them. They talked about this. They talked about the decline of his business and the dustiness of the shop and the bad food. They talked about his drinking and, of course, exaggerated it. And they talked about the queer fellow who sat there day after day and gave everyone the creeps. A few outsiders, hearing the gossip, came to the dining rooms to see the queer fellow and the always tight proprietor, but they did not come again, and there were not enough of the curious to keep the place busy. It went down until it served scarcely 2 customers a day, and Nameless went down with it into drink. Then, one evening, out of the drink, he fished an inspiration. He took it downstairs to Gopak, who was sitting in his usual seat, head hanging, eyes on the floor. "Gopak, listen. You came here because I was the only man who could help you in your trouble. You listening?" A faint "yes" was his answer. "Well now, you told me I'd got to think of something. I've thought of something. Listen, you say I'm responsible for your condition and got to get you out of it because I killed you. I did. We had a row. You made me wild. You dared me. And what with that sun and the jungle and the insects, I wasn't myself. I killed you. The moment it was done, I could have cut my right hand off because you and me were pals. I could have cut my right hand off. I know, I felt that directly it was over. I knew you were suffering. Oh, I have suffered, and I'm suffering now. Well, this is what I've thought. All your present trouble comes from me killing you in that jungle and burying you. An idea came to me. Do you think it would help you if I killed you again?" For some seconds Gopak continued to stare at the floor. Then his shoulders moved. Then, while Nameless watched every little response to his idea, the watery voice began, Yes, that's it. That's what I was waiting for. That's why I came here. I can see now. That's why I had to get here. Nobody else could kill me. Only you. I've got to be killed again. Yes, I see, but nobody else would be able to kill me. Only the man who first killed me. Yes, you found what we're both waiting for. Anybody else could shoot me, stab me, hang me, but they couldn't kill me. Only you. That's why I managed to get here and find you. The watery voice rose to a thin strength. That's it. And you must do it. Do it now. You don't want to, I know, but you must. You must. His head drooped, and he stared at the floor. Nameless, too, stared at the floor. He was seeing things. He had murdered a man and had escaped all punishment save that of his own mind, which had been terrible enough. But now he was going to murder him again. Not in a jungle, but in a city. And he saw the slow points of the result. He saw the arrest. He saw the first hearing. He saw the trial. He saw the cell. He saw the rope. He shuddered. Then he saw the alternative. The breakdown of his life, a ruined business, poverty, the poor house, a daughter robbed of her health and perhaps dying, and always the curse of the dead living man who might follow him to the poorhouse. Better to end it all, he thought. Rid himself of the curse which Gopak had brought upon him and his family, and then rid his family of himself with a revolver. Better to follow up his idea. He got stiffly to his feet. The hour was late evening, 10:30, and the streets were quiet. He had pulled down the shop blinds and locked the door. The room was lit by one light at the farther end. He moved about uncertainly and looked at Gopak. How shall I? Gopak said, You did it with a knife just under the heart. You must do it that way again. Nameless stood and looked at him for some seconds. Then, with an air of resolve, he shook himself. He walked quickly to the kitchen. 3 minutes later, his wife and daughter heard a crash, as though a table had been overturned. They called, but got no answer. When they came down, they found him sitting in one of the pews, wiping sweat from his forehead. He was white and shaking, and appeared to be recovering from a faint. Whatever's the matter? You all right? He waved them away. Yes, I'm all right. Touch of giddiness. Smoking too much, I think. Or drinking. Where's your friend? Out for a walk? No, he's gone off. Said he wouldn't impose any longer, and he'd go and find an infirmary. He spoke weakly and found trouble in picking words. Didn't you hear the bang when he shut the door? I thought that was you fell down. No, it was him when he went. I couldn't stop him. Just as well, I think. She looked about her. Things seem to have gone all wrong since he's been here. There was a general air of dustiness about the place. The tablecloths were dirty, not from use, but from disuse. The windows were dim. A long knife, very dusty, was lying on the table under the window. In a corner by the door leading to the kitchen, unseen by her, lay a dusty mackintosh and dungaree, which appeared to have been tossed there, but it was over by the main door, near the first pew, that the dust was thickest. A long trail of it, greyish-white dust. Really, this place gets more and more slapdash. Just look at that dust by the door. Looks as though somebody's been spilling ashes all over the place. Nameless looked at it, and his hand shook a little, but he answered more firmly than before. Yes, I know. I'll have a proper clean-up tomorrow. For the first time in 10 weeks he smiled at them. A thin, haggard smile, but a smile. If you like that story, consider supporting me as a patron. That way you help me make more stories for you and get access to a patrons-only library of stories. Lots more hours for you to listen to.
Tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come back?
So that was The Hollow Man by Thomas Burke. So as is my d'habitude, I'm still learning French, Thomas Burke. Thomas Burke was born Sidney Thomas Burke, so he used his second name just as I do, John Anthony Walker. On 29th November 1886 at Clapham Junction in South London, not the railway station, I'm guessing. His father died within months of his birth, and his early years were unsettled. He lived for a time with an uncle in Poplar, and later entered a home for boys described as respectably descended but without adequate means. as opposed to those without adequate means who are not respectably descended. That was a different home altogether. The sense of being an outsider, both socially and geographically, would remain with him, and in later years he elaborated or even invented episodes of his childhood, placing himself in East End streets he had not in fact grown up in. This self-mythologizing was not a minor quirk, but a strategy. He fashioned for himself the persona of an authentic interpreter of London's hidden quarters, particularly the Limehouse district. Burke's first published story, The Bellamy Diamonds, appeared in Spare Moments in 1901. He began in earnest as an essayist, issuing Nights in Town, a London autobiography, in 1915, where he presented himself as a night walker chronicler of working-class life. The following year brought Limehouse Nights, 1916, the book that made his reputation. This collection of melodramatic short stories drawing on the docklands and the Chinese community of Limehouse was at once notorious and popular. The Times Literary Supplement condemned it as lurid and irresponsible, but readers bought it in large numbers, and prominent authors such as H.G. Wells and Arnold Bennett praised it. The American director D.W. Griffith purchased the film rights to The Chink and the Child, transforming it into the silent film Broken Blossoms, 1919. Other Burke stories also reached the screen, including Dream Street, 1921, and Twinkle Toes, 1926. At the height of his fame, his name was linked with the exotic East End in the same way Kipling's was linked with colonial India. Burke never fully escaped that association, though he wrote in many registers. His output included further Limehouse tales, such as The Sun in Splendour, 1926, and volumes of essays on London life. He also ventured into the grotesque and the supernatural. Dark Nights, 1924, contains the novella The Bloomsbury Wonder, and Night Pieces, 1935, gathers 18 stories ranging from crime to ghost fiction. Several of these, The Hollow Man, just read it, Johnson Looked Back, The Lonely Inn, are still read as effective examples of British weird writing of the interwar years. The Hands of Mr. Ottermole, first published in 1929, was voted by critics in 1949 the finest mystery story ever written, and was later adapted for Alfred Hitchcock Presents in 1957. Burke's literary influences are clear enough. He borrowed from the melodramatic energies of Victorian penny fiction, from Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater, and from Dickens' Eye for the Underside of London. His prose blended romantic fatalism with close observation. Critics often accused him of recycling the same material. His Limehouse became a myth market he returned to again and again. Interesting. But his best work rises above stereotype by combining atmosphere, sympathy for the dispossessed, and a keen sense of the city as a stage of chance and doom. In his private life, Burke was elusive. He claimed friendships with Chinese shopkeepers and philosophers, claimed to have absorbed their wisdom in Limehouse tea shops and opium dens. These tales were untrue, but they fed his legend as an insider in worlds his middle-class readers could only imagine. Later in life, he published For Your Convenience, 1937, an eccentric guide to London's public urinals, which has since been read as a coded map of homosexual subculture. A reminder that his interest in hidden geographies was not confined to Limehouse, whatever that means. Burke died on 22nd September 1945, aged 58, at the Homeopathic Hospital in Queen Square, Bloomsbury. His reputation had already waned. The Limehouse community was dispersing, and his novels lacked the staying power to anchor a legacy. Yet his shorter tales refused to disappear. Television anthologies revived Ottermole and The Dumb Wife, and horror anthologists have kept The Hollow Man and The Lonely Inn in circulation. Today, Burke's legacy is mixed but intriguing. He remains inseparable from the stereotypes of Chinatown he helped to popularise, yet his work also bears witness to the vanished London of courts, alleys and pubs that no longer exist. His best stories convey an urban atmosphere where crime shades into the uncanny and where the city itself seems complicit in human fate. If his contemporaries once styled him the laureate of London's Chinatown, he might more fairly be remembered as a chronicler of London's shadows. In Dark Nights, 1924, Night Pieces, they are not ghost stories in the M.R. James mould so much as uncanny tales or weird tales, where the streets of London themselves become complicit in terror. In Johnson Looked Back, a man pursued through foggy alleys finds his hunter to be a maimed, eyeless revenant. So I've spoiled that one for you. The Hollow Man revives a long-dead corpse who seeks release in the metropolis. You know that. The Lonely Inn sets its trap in the Derbyshire countryside, a tale of disappearance and spectral vengeance. Not too many spoilers there. While the Black Courtyard turns an ordinary space into a locus of dread. Even stories that resolve spoiler just avoided, such as The Horrible God, dwell first in supernatural atmosphere. What unites them is Burke's sense that the city is porous to the uncanny, that its courts and alleys are not neutral settings but active agents of fear. These tales, brief, atmospheric and fatalistic, have kept his name alive in anthologies long after his Limehouse melodramas fell from view. Now, you may understand, or you may know, that I'm quite a fan of psychogeography. Now, I think that's fallen out of fashion now, but it still lingers a little bit, and it's this idea that one wanders the streets of a city. It began in Paris. There's a guy called Steve Pyle did a book called Unreal Cities, looking at the psychogeography of places in Malaysia, I think. I did read it, but it was many years ago. It was a great book, actually. I don't know where it is now, amongst these piles somewhere. It was really, really good. Really good book. He's a geographer. But I mean, very much the psychogeographer is open to the uncanny, the spiritual. It's the felt city, if you know what I mean. It's not just the observed city, it's how it feels, the stories that haunt. And the truth is, of course, that many of the stories, I mean, you go to Baker Street, there was never a Sherlock Holmes, but there's a sign up now, and you will feel as if Sherlock Holmes had been there, but he never was, you know. And so this is like how in psychogeography, the real folk stories, literary stories, the imagined, all kind of brew up together and leave you with atmosphere. Of course, as a writer of ghost stories, as a former ghost tour leader, I'm really interested in the atmospheres of places and whether we bring them with us as individuals, whether they induce them. Think of Mary King's Court in Edinburgh. Other places, you know, I've been to Salem in... It's rather, there's not much spooky about Salem now. It's more theatrical. But even that's another layer, you know. I've never been to New Orleans one of these days. I understand it's very dangerous, though. I'm a bit old for street fighting and wearing Kevlar vests. But London's a bit like that now. So they say. I was there a couple of weeks ago. I never had any problems. But I mean, I understand statistically it's really jumped up. Anyway, digression. Let's talk about this story. So it was published in Collier's magazine. Remember, many of these stories, Lovecraft, everybody's, Conan Doyle's, H.G. Wells, they all appeared in magazines, which were the successors of the mid 19th century penny dreadfuls. And before that, anyway. But if you look at my reading of Varney the Vampire, I talk a bit more about those in the commentary there, if you're interested in that, which I am. It was then, he came out in 1933, illustrated by C.C. Beale. It then was collected in his own Night Pieces, 18 Tales. It came out in 1935. Was reprinted in 2016 by Valancourt. I got this story from the Oxford Book of English Ghost Stories. Okay, let's look at corpses in your dining room, and even if your dining room is public. So what happens when the dead come back? Not to rattle chains, but to sit down in your house and refuse to leave. The Hollow Man is not an English ghost story in the Jamesian mould. It belongs to the darker line of the restless dead who return as bodies, animated, yet not bizarrely, but worth noting, not complete. There's something missing from them, a vitality. The élan vital has gone. On that axis, it speaks to the early 20th century idea of the zombie, also, and to Leonid Andreev's Lazarus, Russian story. I've read that. Have a look for it. Again, a very dreadful story, a story. And also, what I would say, we're talking about affect, weren't we? We're talking about the feel of a story. I read a book recently by Christopher Neve about British landscape painting. And I'm reading a selection of essays by John Berger at the moment. And so I'm interested in reading about painting. And the thing about a painting, David Lynch said this famously, he was never asked to explain his paintings. And I did a story called The Monolith, and I was deliberately painting it, you know, with feeling tones. That sounds very avant-garde, doesn't it? Oh, yes, love, I was painting it with feeling tones. But the truth is that I was trying to resist... there is a story about what happened, and the clues are in the story if you just can piece them together. But I was looking for the feeling of it. Like when you look at a picture, you get the feeling of the picture. You listen to music, you watch a piece of dance, you look at a sculpture, look at a landscape. It's a feeling, it's an affect, and that's. So I started talking about this because the thing that Lazarus, the Russian story Lazarus, 1906, and this one, they both leave me with this awful, hollow, bleak, dead, desolate, hopeless feeling that it's like a disease. I feel diseased. And that is the feeling tone I get from these stories. And I think it's definitely worth talking about, not just, we moderns, we want to, particularly we very moderns, we want to know, what's the beginning, middle, and end? I want to know what happened. Oh yeah, I've tied that up. Yes, of course. It's when you I think I said this before. I think Gandalf says about Saruman, when you take something apart to find out how it works, you've left the path of wisdom. And I would say is when you take a story or a piece of art apart, you lose something of the feeling. Because it becomes conceptualized, it becomes a nice tidy little set of thoughts rather than feelings. And believe me, feelings are more. I'm not against thoughts. I do have them, but I think they're really useful. But what we're looking for here is feeling, and this is the feeling we get. Lazarus is probably worse than this for that. The void of death. Neither of these ghosts, Lazarus or Gopak, are vengeful. In the traditional ghost story, a ghost may seek revenge, but they don't seek revenge. They are weary. They are just sapping, negative. They're like what we do in the shadows, the psychic vampires, aren't they? Who it's a great series. That makes me laugh even thinking about it. But, they are not figures of joy. They can't be around living people. They corrode living people. And I think it was a weird story because at times it could have shaded into the absurd and the laughable. I think he did it very well in that, okay, there's this thing about suspension of disbelief. It's particularly with a supernatural story. You can push things so far with a story that the readers go, that's never happened. That never happens. Too far-fetched, and you've lost them. And everybody has different capacity for that. Some people can go further than others. But if you lose them, and I think it was teetering on that, this juxtaposition of the ordinary London working-class area of Limehouse and this working man's diner, very real, very mundane. It's all about tills and, boiled beef and dust. Dust plays a role in this story. But and then you have this utterly bizarre and corroding thing about a corpse, but it's not a corpse. It's something in between. It's a revenant, isn't it? And I think that's the real horror of the Revenant. It's not the urbane, sparkly vampires, or even tuxedo-wearing vampires, or even sexy vampires. It's that death in life is really horrific. And I think that's an example of what I was saying. We know so much about vampires now. They're no longer frightening to us. We don't get much from them anymore and we have to twist them. So, with the Twilight, we make them teen hunks and they sparkle because we need something new, and they're actually playing a different role there. But this is death in life, and it's absolutely monstrous in that, it's uncanny, it's weird. Anyway, we won't even go into those, talk about those a lot. So, horrible. Now, I like to jump into Freud, so I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the return of the repressed. This is one of the things you find very much in people who are talking about horror stories. So Freud had this idea. Freud believed in the unconscious, he wasn't the first one, but he's really credited at this, and it exists, the unconscious, he discovered it. He's had a lot of, I'm also reading a new biography of Freud at the moment, and people don't like Freud, I think, because he talks about sex and he reminds them of things they don't want to be reminded of, and so they want to throw him out with the bathwater. I don't know about these things. You bugger off, Mr. Freud. I don't like you disturbing me, telling me that these things I don't want to know about. I'm not going to even mention what they are. And so there are things which we cannot tolerate, and this is modern clinical practice. If you work in mental health, this is a commonplace. This is absolutely accepted, that there are things we dissociate, we just do not keep in our minds, but nevertheless they are there and they lurk in our unconscious, and they have this baleful gravity. They're like Pluto's effect on the orbit of Neptune. Before it was even discovered, something was going on. Pluto's in the unconscious, but Neptune's there being affected by a hidden content, if you like what I mean. You like what I mean? Not mean what I like? And so Freud's idea was there are things that we have thoughts of and things that occur in our lives that we repress, we put away, we do not want them, we actively seal them off. And it takes a lot of energy, as Freud would have called it, libido. This can sap our health because we're having to divert so much energy into keeping these dreadful things out of our consciousness because they're so disturbing. And Freud would say that actually this is a failed enterprise. We can achieve it a little bit, but things seep in. There is, like I say, the influence of Pluto on Neptune's orbit. It's unseen, but it has an effect. And so if we have these repressed contents, we keep them, and it wearies us. This is what I'm saying about this kind of thing. This you can see probably what I'm trying to sketch out here, that this repressed corpse is a kind of embodiment of the return of the repressed. This is something that our man Nameless didn't want to think about, and here it is. But symbolically, it's like, if you've, let's say you've murdered somebody, which I haven't, and say that is on your conscience, you never tell anybody. But it's always on your mind, even when you don't think, or you succeed in keeping it out of your everyday life. But you've got a dark secret, and it's there. And it is like having a dead man sitting in your dining room when it comes back, I suppose. I think it's very interesting. Of course I do. Let's talk about zombie law. So this is what we call the first wave of modern undead imagination, the first wave of zombie. There was a zombie wave. If you look at Western civilization, it becomes repeatedly fascinated with ancient Egypt. First of all, even in the 1500s and the 1600s, they start eating mummies. So there's a fascination with mummies in Egypt. Then, and it comes back when Napoleon goes into Egypt, I think the end of the 18th century. And then it comes back in the 20s with the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. It's come back various times. And so do zombies. They don't go as far back as that. But so this is first wave zombie stuff. So it's a corpse which is restored against its will, and we're told by the leopard men, so we have that kind of nod towards African magic that we see in voodoo as well. And it's the undead. It's not like a ghost. It's not like a vampire, and it's not like a ghost. In fact, I think in the original zombies, there were corpses brought back to life just to toil, do labour on the farms. And the William Seabrook's travel book, The Magic Island, 1929, is generally credited with introducing the word zombie to a wide readership. And he described them as corpses reanimated by voodoo sorcery to labour mindlessly in the cane fields, and they're neither living nor dead. So they're actually a new thing in the Western mind. They're not ghosts and they're not vampires. And pulp magazines and Hollywood picked this up, and Victor Halperin's White Zombie 1932, starring Bela Lugosi, is the first feature-length zombie film. And also Guy Endor's The Werewolf of Paris 1933 is often remembered for lycanthropy. Talks about the abject undead. I don't know why I put that in, really. Terror Tales 1934 to 41 regularly featured zombie yarns alongside vampires and mummies. And of course, these were the staple of early horror films, weren't they? I mean, if Abbott and Costello have fought against them, then it shows they were alive in the popular imagination. So Burke's Hollow Man comes out in 1933, when the idea of the zombie is already established. And then, of course, later on, We have Night of the Living Dead and all of those films which are the second wave. And I think even now we've had the third wave, which I'm not totally up to date with, which is the One of Us, is it? That's a really massive series. I haven't seen it. I saw the start of it. My kids loved it, about the zombies, and we have this mechanism. They're infected by this fungus. So I think that's third wave, more or less. Third wave zombie. I did a story called The Zombie of Palo Alto, but I had to take it down due to copyright reasons. But this is my first proper zombie story. Anyway, again, always lots to say about these things. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed our gallop around the environ, the surroundings of this story. I've lost my thread completely now. My thread jumps around. It's gone now. Anyway, I hope you're all well. It's red hot here, actually, and I'm going to go and take the dogs out for a walk. Jasper's got his operation tomorrow. Fingers crossed. I'm feeling quite hopeful about his recovery now. It's a terrible thing, but it's got to be done because he'll die if he doesn't have it done. And he's lying here now next to me. He hasn't got a clue, and that's all for the best, isn't it? Because tomorrow I'm going to say to him, Private Jasper, over the top. And he's going to go over the top, and I'll say to him, I'm your sergeant, and I will pick you up when you fall, and I'll bring you home, and then we'll get you healed. But you've got to go over the top on your own. My lovely boy. He's just blinked at me. Anyway, that's enough. Don't let me blub. All right, bye.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come back?